Pete, for finding the time for this interview. I know you're really busy within Heineken, and we do appreciate it, and I think the Rep Council members will as well when they see the kind of things that we cover. So thank you for that. Has there been any kind of fundamental changes in what you do or how you do it?
Change will never stop, either organisationally, functionally, in terms of the thinking around what we do. So that will always change without question. I think that the need for, if I think of what we do and I think of our function, I think the need is to shape that future change and say, how do we want what we do to evolve, or how do we need it to evolve in order to better support what the organisational needs are? And that for me is the biggest challenge that we've got. And it goes back to this idea that the reputation isn't about what you say, it's about what you do as an organisation. Mm-hmm. And therefore, if you talk about reputation and you talk about what it is, it's about the actions of a company, not the words of a company. And therefore, the consequent impact on us as a function and what we do is enormous. And that's where we need to shape the future change of certainly the function. So the idea of communication, I think is important, but it's not something that we say is what we do. It's a much, much broader issue. The idea that reputation isn't communication is a really, really strong and important one.
And you've outlined very clearly what your role is and how it's changed. What specific challenges does that create, in terms of working with an organisation of this size and this scale? What are the kind of things you've got to overcome in order to achieve the objectives that you very clearly articulate?
So I think ultimately it's all about quality of decision making. So I think it's all about, have we taken the decision as a group of management with knowledge about what our stakeholders are thinking and about what the impact of the decision could be if we haven't done that. And ultimately I think the benefit of doing that and just acting as a check and a balance, or bringing new information to the table which make the decision perhaps a better one, is a really important part of the role. And I think when people are talking so much about the convergence of these roles with other parts of the C-suite, as it's called, I think that role, that kind of outside world in, check, balance, challenge, advise, influence, that whole kind of package that we as a function should be bringing to the table, I think we would risk losing that at our peril in that debate about should we or should we not integrate with other parts of the C-suite.
And Heineken is obviously a very global organisation. You work in many markets all over the world. High degree of diversity in terms of political, cultural and economic environments in which you work. Does that present specific challenges from the point of view of corporate relations?
Yeah, every day. And that's one of the beauties of the job. The idea that one size does not fit all is, I would say, in our business, which has 70 markets, so we have operations in 70 markets, it's a significant number, it's a differentiating factor versus our competitors. But our competitors are in many markets as well. So the idea that cultural difference has to define how you operate in that culture, but at the same time having to be consistent with the rest of the world and an ideal which part of the world would look at and say, that's what we expect of you as an organisation globally, but locally the expectation may be different. That's something that we struggle with every day.
And if you tell us what, if those challenges, given those challenges that you've indicated that you face if you're going to work in a diverse range of countries and markets, how do you overcome them? What are the tools, or what are the kind of qualities that you need in order to reconcile the differences that you have from one market to the next.
Really, listen and try and understand. I accept that you're not going to be able to have 70 different approaches for 70 different markets, but be prepared to flex the approach when you can in order to meet the needs of the markets. I certainly think that this idea of inclusive growth is going to be a really powerful idea over the next 5 to 10 years. The idea that organisations like Heineken, like other big multinationals, need to grow with communities and countries and support their growth as much as supporting the company growth, I think is a really, really strong idea gaining momentum. It's different, I think, than the classic sustainability agenda. It's not how we're going to do CO2 or how we're going to do energy or water. It's something more inclusive than that, and it's about how do we as organisations create value and grow with the communities and the countries that we're in. So I think there'll be a big change there. I also think there will be a change in the idea of reputation and the impact that has on companies like us. I see it all the time. So I see it with all of my peers when we get together. The discussion around reputation is deeper, more meaningful, has more impact generally on their organisations when I listen to them talk. And I think that is a trend that will continue. And I think if that trend continues, then the behaviour, and I'm not being critical when I say current behaviour, because I think organisations generally are extremely well behaved, but the behaviour of organisations will change to become much more in sync with those communities, and I think there'll be a convergence, whilst accepting that organisations will never ever be able to deliver everything that all of their stakeholders want, and probably nor should they.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. You have to address crises when they occur. I mean, any business this large is going to periodically face situations where people are critical, where people view the behaviour not to be in line with their expectations. I mean, would you be able to tell me a little bit about how you approach crises when they come along?
The principles generally about managing crises, about clear lines of communication, about great, quick communication between markets and head office, or vice versa, about having an exceptional supply chain. And honestly, supply chains today are great. Within Heineken, we have an outstanding supply chain. The traceability and trackability of what we have in terms of our SKUs, our stock keeping units, is second to none. So there are some basic principles, and then one principle I think is really important, and it's difficult, is judgment. You know, to judge what to say, when to say it, to who to say it, and how to say it. And there, that comes with a lot of experience.
Yeah. In fact, I think there was something with regards to dogfighting relatively recently. It'd be great if you wouldn't mind just sharing some of the lessons you feel you learned, or some of the things that you did that could be useful for other people to be aware of.
So the dogfighting issue was interesting. A, because we never ever saw it coming. Potted history is that we had a promotion in a nightclub in Mongolia. In Mongolia, dogfighting is legal. 2 nights later, in that same nightclub, there was a dogfight. 2 nights after our promotion, our banners hadn't been taken down. A picture was taken. 2 years after the dogfight, the picture of the dogfighting with the Heineken banners suddenly appeared on the internet, and you know how quickly that went. Incredible response to it. Multi-millions of views in a few days. So the reaction to that, your question was about the response to the crisis. The response to that was immediate, but we had to find our way, because we'd never dealt with a significant online crisis. So trying to understand how we dealt with that in real time was a real learning for us. We responded, I think, ultimately in absolutely a model way, and most of the commentary on that episode now you see reflects that. But we responded individually to everybody who was posting. We used our, at that point, I think, 10 million Facebook fans to talk about what the situation was and what we were doing. We formed a partnership with an animal welfare organisation, international welfare organisation, to say this is what we're doing, this is our stance on animal welfare, to have them make some sort of endorsement to try and have the understanding. So in all aspects, it was a very different crisis, and now we have to understand that we operate in that world. So the implication of that particular crisis has been that what we've done is we've changed our system of alert and identification and monitoring of those sort of issues in that whole internet space. So in the digital space, we're now much better prepared for it.
Sean, I know that you're an advocate of almost a political model with regards to corporate relations, i.e. the idea of focusing on specific issues and building campaigns around those issues. Would you mind just telling me a little bit more about why that is something that you see as being valuable and positive from your perspective?
It's really trying to understand what is the view of that issue externally? Why is it important? What is the real issue that they are external, that our stakeholders externally are complaining about? What it is that we can do on it internally? Is it really an issue for us? Can we change? Should we change? And then if we believe that it is, then it's about saying, how do we mobilize our stakeholders? How do we give them information on the issue? How do we propose an alternative? Because actually the idea of going out there and just saying, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong, we don't like it, we don't like it, we don't like it, doesn't actually help us. So we need to be able to say why we believe it's either wrong or won't work, and to be able to provide some sort of alternatives. And the idea of identifying stakeholders who have a vested interest also in that same issue, mobilizing them together, so not just the voice of the company, but the voice of the industry and other impacted industries and trade associations, and the media. And the media is a very broad term now with social media, but mobilizing those, it becomes a very, very powerful movement. But at its heart, it's really understanding the issue, it's understanding the impact on the business, and it's then saying, what do we want to achieve? Be very clear about the outcome, and who do we need to link with and mobilize in order to get our position across. And honestly, I think the most important thing is that at the start, you ask yourself whether we should do something in order to change. Do they have a point? And if they do, let's work out what we need to do differently in order to change. Let's not oppose for opposition's sake.
Heineken is clearly an organisation with lots of very valuable brands, and those brands require marketing. And I would imagine that you do work quite closely with the marketing function within Heineken. Is that the case? And if so, how does that kind of dynamic work between the two functions?
We have to, just as a matter of daily working, link with our colleagues in marketing. They are tasked with something actually which is the same as us, and at the same time it's quite different. So the growth and the health of the business relies on what they do just as much as it relies on what we do. There is a commercial reality that they are faced with in terms of marketing and selling beer in our case. For us, it's about making sure that the organisation operates, behaves, takes action where necessary on issues which typically would not be first on their agenda. It's not what they think about on a daily basis. And our job is to make sure that where possible, necessary, and to our benefit, those external ideas are brought in and linked into the marketing function. And I do think that ultimately, if you operate in that way, then the idea of kind of mutual respect, mutual balance, mutual challenge gets you to a better place as an organisation. I think you would lose the objectivity, and it's certainly in a consumer organisation, you would lose the objectivity that an independent, strong, externally focused corporate relations function brings to that organisation. I think the dilemmas that come to the table in terms of the commercial agenda versus the independence and governance agenda are too big to have those in the same place. I think you want some objective challenge, and whilst the CEO would undoubtedly arbitrate in that situation, to only have one voice at the table that articulates the external perspective, which would be a marketing function in the case you talked about, I think is not what a modern organisation needs, nor what its stakeholders would expect.
Looking through the prism of your CEO, what do you think are the what do you think evidence an effective corporate relations function from his perspective? What are the, actually not just your CEO, any CEO,
Sure.
what are the signs of effectiveness or success relative to what you do and your people and your team around the world?
So I think it's about whether we are taking the right decisions with the right level of information on the right issues. So do they, as CEOs, have that external input that allows them and their teams to take good decisions? Does the function argue and fight for what it as an organisation believes is right? Because I said earlier, you cannot please all of your stakeholders all of the time. So that judgment about where you fight for what you believe is right, but you also internally fight for where you think something needs to be changed is important. Third, I think it's evidence that the actions that the organisation has taken, where it has changed its stance or its policy, have had the positive effect either on reputation or on the commercial agenda or on consumer perception that we said it would, because that makes the decision good, because it's worked from an external stakeholder perspective and it's worked from a business perspective. And I think there would be some general things that certainly my CEO would look for, which is, are we taking a broad enough view of the world, and are we looking down the line? So are we saying our next 3 years looks like this, and along the way, if this is our agenda, these are the things we're going to come across. So we need to be prepared for X and Y and Z, because these are the issues that will come to us because of the route we are proposing to take. And the thinking behind how we should address or partner with stakeholders on those issues is something that we are now, I think that's the next phase of where we're moving to. It's kind of reputation anticipation. And it's really important and high on my CEO's agenda to identify and address those issues early, ahead of time, again, so that we are taking the right decisions when we come to that point in our journey.
You mentioned earlier on that corporate relations now is it's a very strategic role with a seat, if you like, at the in cases of best practice, with a seat at the top table. What are the kind of individual characteristics someone needs within your function if they're going to sit at that top table sustainably? What are the kind of aspects of what they do and their behaviour that are kind of important in order for that to be something that is valued from a leadership perspective?
What I think the leaders of our function need to bear in mind as a consequence of where I think we need to take this function. So it's about leadership, for sure. It is about three words, amongst others, but three words for me are really important. So it's about challenge. So do those leaders have the ability to challenge when they see a decision or a part of a decision-making process that is not with integrity, irresponsible or unsustainable? So that challenge in an appropriate way to help shape the argument is for me a real leadership principle. Influence is the second. Do we shape the argument? Do we shape the issue in such a way that we influence the organisation and our colleagues within it to change the way that we are heading as a business? And if you think about the idea of trying to change an organisation based on what's happening around us, the individual needs to be able to influence the agenda. And not just one agenda, but the commercial agenda, the people agenda, the IT agenda, whatever it is. And to be able to integrate across those functions in order to be able to have that influence. And if you can't do that, the organisation will not change, and therefore we will not be effective leaders. And then the third thing is advise. I often say that we spend our lives in our function talking externally and listening externally. And there is a real responsibility to bring that into the organisation and talk about what's happening. And on the basis of that, to advise our business leaders about what they say, what they do, what issues are out there. And that advice piece is really, really important. So influence, challenge, advise are the big, for me, leadership building blocks that the leader in this function now needs to have.
Well, Sean, thank you very much indeed for your time. That's been a fantastic interview from our point of view, and lots of interesting things that I've thoroughly appreciate being able to talk about, and I'm sure council members in the wider world will also find this interesting. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
You're more than welcome.